The sky over Seoul cracked open. It did not happen with a slow, gentle change from blue to black. It happened all at once. One moment the sky was its usual pale afternoon self. The next it was gone, replaced by a vast dark shape that blocked the sun. This was not one ship. It was a fleet. They were enormous, their hulls the color of old bruises and jagged like broken teeth. They made no sound as they hung in the air, which was more frightening than any roar. Below them, the city of 10 million people fell silent. The constant noise of traffic, of life just stopped. Then, the screaming started. On every screen across the planet, televisions, phones, giant public billboards, the same image appeared. The creature was insect-like, with a hard, shiny exoskeleton. It had multiple dark eyes that held no emotion. Its mouth was a complex set of moving parts like the pincers of a beetle. It stood tall and proud, holding a glowing spear-like weapon. It spoke. Its voice was not translated through subtitles. The meaning was blasted directly into the minds of every human on Earth. The words were clear and cold. People of Earth, we are the Cathar Collective. For generations we have traveled the stars, seeking the most dangerous game. We have hunted the crystal-scaled leviathans of Xylos. We have tracked the shadow stalkers of the Veil Nebula. We are the galaxy's top predators, and we have found a new preserve. The image shifted to show videos of Earth's great animals, a great white shark breaching the water, a Siberian tiger moving through deep snow, a massive grizzly bear standing on its hind legs. Your world is rich with fierce and worthy prey. Your planet is now designated a Class 10 game preserve. The great culling begins now. We will hunt your planet's apex predators. You, humanity, are a herd species. You are not the hunters here. You are part of the landscape. Stay out of our way and you may survive. Interfere and you will be removed. The broadcast ended. The screens went back to normal. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The alien ships did not fire weapons. Instead, smaller ships, like sharpened stones, shot out from the larger ones and headed for remote, wild places on the planet. The Amazon, the Serengeti, the taiga forests of Russia. On the ground, panic was total. Governments went into emergency meetings. Military leaders proposed firing every missile they had. Scientists and diplomats begged for caution. The aliens had technology that could block out the sun and speak inside people's heads. What could missiles do? In a secure underground bunker, the United Nations Emergency Council was in a state of chaos. People shouted over each other in a dozen languages, "We must strike back. Show them our strength," a general from a large nation yelled. "And if their shields are stronger than our warheads, then what? We would have declared war on a species that considers us grass," shouted another. A quieter woman, Dr. Anya Sharma, head of a xeno-studies think tank, watched the arguments. She had been analyzing the broadcast. She spoke, and her calm voice cut through the noise. "They called themselves the top predators," she said. "This is not a war of conquest to them. It is a sport, a safari. They see our mightiest creatures as trophies. They do not see us as a threat at all. We are..." Background noise. "So what do? Roll over and let them hunt our wildlife to extinction?" The general snapped. "No," Dr. Sharma said. "We change the game. They are hunters. To beat a hunter, you do not send a bigger, louder soldier. You send a better hunter." A skeptical silence fell over the room. A better hunter? What does that mean? "A tiger cannot fight a spaceship." "Not a tiger," Dr. Sharma said, bringing up a new file on the main screen. "A human. But not a soldier. Soldiers are trained for combat against other soldiers. We need someone who understands hunting in a way these aliens cannot even imagine." The file on the screen was not a military dossier. It was a collection of reports from local police, park rangers, and strange, grainy photos. The subject was a ghost. Far from the panic, in a deep, misty valley in the Gangwon-do province of South Korea, the world was still quiet. The air was cold and clean. Tall pine trees reached for the sky, and the only sounds were the wind and the chatter of a small river. Here a boy was working. His name was Kim Jun. He was 17, but his eyes were older. He wore faded cargo pants stained with dirt and sap, and a thick hoodie that had once been dark green but was now a muddy brown. His hair was a little too long, falling into his eyes. His face was set in a look of mild, constant irritation, as if the world was a slightly poorly organized place. He was kneeling by a stream, his hands moving with a slow, sure rhythm. He was repairing a snare. It was a simple, elegant thing made of wire and a few carefully bent branches. He tested its tension, his fingers feeling for the perfect balance between strength and sensitivity. A satellite phone, an old bulky model, lay on a rock nearby. It was beeping softly, a red light flashing. It had been doing that for an hour. June ignored it completely. The outside world and its problems were a distant, annoying buzz. He finished with the snare and placed it carefully in a gap between two rocks near the water, a place where small animals would come to drink. He covered it with loose leaves and moss until it was invisible. He stood up, stretched, and looked around his home. A small, simple wooden cabin stood back from the stream, almost hidden by the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney. This was his place. It was all he needed. The sound of an engine was a violent intrusion. It was the grinding, clumsy sound of a vehicle that did not belong here. June's frown deepened. He watched as a black SUV, its shiny paint job looking ridiculous among the earthy tones of the forest, bumped and scraped its way down the rough track towards his cabin. The vehicle stopped. The engine cut off and the sudden silence felt sharp. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, completely wrong for the woods. Her posture was rigid, her eyes scanning the area with a calculating coolness. This was Agent Park. June did not move from his spot by the stream. He just watched her. Agent Park saw him. She walked towards him, her polished shoes crunching on the gravel. She stopped a few feet away. "Kim June?" she said, her voice as crisp as her suit. June didn't answer right away. He picked up a smooth stone from the stream bank and skipped it across the water. 1, 2, 3, 4 skips before it sank. "You're scaring the game," he said finally, his voice flat. "And you're on my land." Agent Park was not used to being spoken to this way. She blinked, but her composure did not break. "My name is Park. I am with the National Intelligence Service. We have a situation." "Don't care," June said, turning his back to her to look at his snare again. "Whatever it is, it's your situation, not mine." "This concerns every person on the planet," Agent Park said, her tone hardening. "Including you. Alien ships are in orbit. They have declared Earth a hunting ground." June paused. He looked up at the small patch of sky visible between the trees. It was still clear. He looked back at her, his expression one of pure skepticism. "Aliens? Yes, and they're here to hunt?" "That is what they said." A long silence stretched between them. June seemed to be processing this. He wasn't shocked or scared. He looked more inconvenienced. "So they're going to hunt tigers and bears and things?" he asked. "That is their stated goal." June almost shrugged. "Okay, let them. It's a stupid way to die. A bear will rip your arms off. Not my problem." He started walking back towards his cabin, dismissing her. Agent Park felt a flash of anger. "They are not coming with spears and knives, boy. They have technology we cannot understand. They could wipe us out if we annoy them." June stopped at his door and turned around. "You said they were hunters. Real hunters don't wipe out the whole forest because one animal is annoying. They just deal with the animal." He shook his head. "This sounds like a lot of noise and trouble." "I don't like noise and trouble. You should leave." He opened the door to his cabin to go inside. That was when the sound came. It was a low, deep hum that was not a sound you heard with your ears, but one you felt in your bones. It vibrated up from the ground, making the pine needles on the forest floor shiver. June froze, his hand on the door. His head tilted. This was a new sound, an unwelcome one. Agent Park looked at her tablet, her face pale. "A Cathar landing pod. It's coming down here. In this valley, they're tracking a Siberian tiger. The park rangers tagged one that's been spotted in this area." June's eyes narrowed. He looked from the agent to the woods, then back to the agent. The grumpy, bored mask was gone. For the first time, there was a sharp, focused light in his eyes. "They're landing here?" he asked, his voice quiet. "In my valley?" Before Agent Park could answer, a streak of fire tore through the sky above the treetops. Something heavy and metallic crashed into the forest about a mile away. The sound of splintering trees echoed through the hills. The hunt was no longer a distant problem on a news screen. It had landed in his front yard. The low hum of the alien ship faded, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. The birds had stopped singing. The air itself felt heavy. Kim June stood perfectly still at the door of his cabin, his head cocked, listening. The crash had come from the east, near the old ginseng patch he had been carefully tending for the better part of a year. Agent Park was all business, her fear shoved down deep. She was speaking into a comms unit on her wrist. Confirm Cathar landing grid 79 pod. Estimated hostiles unknown. The asset is secured but non-compliant. She looked at June. We need to move. Now. My orders are to extract you to a secure facility. June ignored her. He walked away from the cabin door, not towards the SUV, but towards a large, moss-covered storage shed tucked behind the trees. Facility? He grunted, pulling the shed door open. Why would I go to a box when the problem is right here? Inside the shed was not a collection of farming tools. It was an arsenal of a different kind. There were rolls of strong, thin wire, bundles of sharpened steel rods, carefully folded nets made of synthetic fiber, and several handmade bows with quivers of arrows. It was the workshop of a trapper, not a soldier. What are you doing? Agent Park asked, her voice tight with impatience. They're here for the tiger, June said, selecting a coil of wire and slinging a bow over his shoulder. The big male. He has a territory near my ginseng patch. If they mess with him, they'll mess with my plants. He said it with the same gravity another person might use to say, they'll launch a nuclear missile. That's what you're worried about? Your plants? Agent Park sounded incredulous. June finally looked at her, his expression dead serious. It's good ginseng. He moved out of the shed and started walking, not on the path, but straight into the thick undergrowth. He moved without a sound, his body flowing through the brush like water. Agent Park, in her suit and polished shoes, struggled to keep up, the noisy crunch of her steps a stark contrast to his silence. Kim June, this is not a game. These are advanced alien warriors. You cannot fight them with wire and a bow. I'm not going to fight them, June said without looking back. I'm going to see what they're doing. A mile away, the Cathar hunting party was getting its bearings. The pod had carved a scar through the trees, its heat scorching the earth. There were 3 of them. They were taller than a man, their chitinous shells a mottled pattern of dark green and black, perfect for a forest, though they seemed oblivious to this. They moved with a heavy, confident clatter, their multiple jointed legs stamping down on the forest floor without care. Their leader, whom June would later think of as click-clack for the sound its limbs made, held a device that pulsed with a soft green light. It emitted a low ping, ping, ping. On its screen was the ghostly thermal outline of a large cat, moving slowly about 500 meters away. The prey is near, click-clack said, its voice a series of clicks and buzzes that its helmet translated. A fine specimen. Its skull will look well in the Hall of Trophies. They began to march, their heavy feet trampling ferns and young saplings. They did not look for paths. They made their own. June and Agent Park reached a high ridge overlooking the landing site. They crouched behind a fallen log. June's eyes narrowed as he watched the aliens. He wasn't looking at their weapons or their armor. He was watching their feet. He saw how they crushed a patch of wild blueberries. He saw one of them snap a low-hanging branch from a centuries-old pine just because it was in its way. Then, the lead alien, click-clack, stopped. It was standing at the edge of June's ginseng patch. The plants were not obvious to an untrained eye, just a small area of leafy green plants with red berries. The alien looked down at the device in its hand, then at the patch. It seemed annoyed that the plants were in its direct path to the tiger. With a dismissive flick of its powerful arm, it used the butt of its energy lance to swipe across the patch, tearing up the precious plants, roots and all, scattering dirt and leaves. From the ridge, June let out a sharp, quiet breath. It wasn't a gasp of fear. It was the sound of a pot coming to a boil. Agent Park felt the change in him. The grumpy teenager was gone. What was left was something cold and still and dangerously focused. June, she whispered, what are you thinking? They're rude, he said, his voice low and flat. And they're on my land. He melted away from the log before she could respond. The Cathar hunters were closing in on the tiger. The big cat knew it was being hunted. It had stopped moving and was now crouched in a thicket, its golden eyes watching the noisy, strange-smelling things approach. Its muscles were coiled, its tail twitching. Click-clack raised its energy lance. A low whine built in the weapon. A clean shot to the shoulder. Immobilize it for the tagging ceremony. They never got the shot. From the trees to their left, a sharp whistle cut through the air. It was a perfect imitation of a hawk's cry. All 3 aliens turned their heads, their weapons swinging towards the sound. There was nothing there. In that moment of distraction, the tiger, sensing its chance, burst from the thicket. It didn't attack the hunters. It ran. a blur of orange and black disappearing into the deeper forest. Click-clack let out a frustrated series of clicks. The prey flees. After it. They stomped forward, but the lead hunter's foot sank deep into the soft earth before it could take its second step. It wasn't just mud. It was a bog, a patch of wet, sucking ground hidden by a layer of moss and leaves. The more the alien struggled, the deeper it sank. Its heavy armor, an advantage in a fight, was now a death sentence. It thrashed, its clicks turning into alarmed buzzes. The other two moved to help it, but one of them stepped on what looked like a firm, flat stone. The stone was a cleverly balanced trigger. There was a loud snap and a swish of movement from the trees. A heavy log, sharpened to a point at one end, swung down in a brutal arc. It was too slow to hit the agile alien squarely, but it slammed into its side, sending it stumbling back with a crack in its chitinous plating. The third hunter froze, its weapon scanning the trees. It saw nothing. The forest was silent and still, but it felt alive with menace. From his new hiding place, June watched. He hadn't fired an arrow. He hadn't thrown a spear. He had just used the land. The bog was always there. The deadfall trap was one he'd set months ago for wild boar that kept rooting up a different part of the forest. He had just led the noisy aliens to them. The two standing hunters finally managed to pull their leader from the bog, its legs covered in thick black mud. They were angry and confused. This was not hunting. This was inconvenience. They decided to retreat to their pod to reassess. They took a different route back, trying to be more careful. They walked in a small rocky stream, thinking it would hide their trail. They didn't know that June had spent years redirecting the flow of smaller streams for his own purposes. As the lead hunter, now limping from the log trap, stepped onto a seemingly solid bank, the ground beneath it gave way. It wasn't a deep hole, but it was filled with sharpened bamboo stakes that June had hardened in fire. The stakes couldn't pierce the alien's tough leg armor completely, but one of them jammed hard into the joint at the knee, where the plating was thinner. The hunter screamed, a high-pitched electronic shriek of pain and rage. It fell, clutching its leg. The other two dragged their injured comrade the rest of the way to the pod, their confidence shattered. They had not seen their enemy. They had not fought a battle. They had been systematically, humiliatingly hurt by the forest itself. Once the pod's door hissed shut and the craft lifted off with an angry roar, the forest grew quiet again. June emerged from the shadows. He walked over to the torn-up ginseng patch, kneeling down to look at the damage. He sighed. Then he walked to the stream bank where the hunter had fallen. Lying in the mud next to the triggered stake pit was one of their energy lances. It must have been dropped in the panic. He picked it up. It was lighter than he expected. He turned it over in his hands, examining the glowing parts and the trigger mechanism. He pointed it at a nearby rock and pressed a button. Nothing happened. There was probably a safety lock, or it needed a biological signature. He wasn't impressed. He looked at the intricate weapon, then at the simple, effective, sharpened stake that had actually drawn alien blood. Clumsy, he muttered to himself. He tossed the advanced alien weapon onto the ground near his shed as if it were a piece of junk, and went inside to get a pot for his salvaged ginseng roots. Agent Park stood alone at the edge of the clearing, her tablet forgotten in her hand. She had just watched 3 of the galaxy's most feared predators be defeated not by an army, but by a grumpy teenager and a few well-placed sticks. She looked from the retreating speck of the alien pod to June's closed cabin door. A slow, grim smile spread across her face. She keyed her comms unit. Command, this is Park. The asset is not just secure. He's operational. And I think the Cathar have just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The story of what happened in the valley did not make the public news. Governments were trying to prevent total panic. But the Cathar knew. On their mothership, the High Hunter watched the scrambled, frantic reports from the returning hunting party. One hunter was stuck in a mud pit. Another was struck by a swinging tree. A third was injured by a primitive spike in the ground. Their prey, the tiger, had escaped. The High Hunter was a massive specimen, his shell covered in scars and etched markings of past kills. He was not angry. He was confused. This was not how hunting worked. Prey did not set traps. The environment was not a weapon. It was just a setting. Explain this, he commanded, his voice a low rumble. The leader of the failed hunt, Click-Clack, stood before him, its shell still smeared with mud. The terrain was hostile, High Hunter. It was not the prey. It was the world itself. The world itself, the high hunter repeated, the words tasting strange. He looked at the data from Earth. The planet was classified as a level 7 biohazard, mostly for its diseases and large predators. The dominant species, human, was listed as a tool-using social herbivore. They were not considered a threat, but this incident did not fit. A herbivore did not set traps. Meanwhile, in a different part of the ship, the wider Cathar population was watching their own version of the news. The story of the ghost forest was spreading. Hunters who had been boasting about their upcoming trophies were now hearing whispers of a valley that fought back. The idea was ridiculous, but it was also unsettling. Their reputation was built on being the most feared hunters in the galaxy. Doubt was a poison. Back on Earth, June's life had become much more complicated. Agent Park had not left. More black SUVs had arrived. They set up a small temporary camp at the edge of his land. They called it a forward operating base. June called it a nuisance. He sat on the steps of his cabin, sharpening a long, curved knife called a gile on a smooth stone. The rhythmic shh, shh sound was the only thing he found calming. A young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and her hair tied back in a practical ponytail approached him. She held a tablet and a small drone. This was Lee Hanna, the team's drone operator and tech expert. "Kim June?" she said, her voice much softer than Agent Park's. He didn't look up. "If you're here to ask me to go to your city box, the answer is no." "I'm not," Hanna said. She sat on the ground near his steps, not too close. She showed him her tablet. On it was a map of Korea. "I'm here because they're moving. The Cathar, after what happened here, they've stopped hunting in just the remote areas. They're getting bolder. There are sightings near smaller towns. People are scared." June kept sharpening his knife. "Still not my problem." Hanna zoomed in on the map. They were here near the demilitarized zone 2 days ago. They were tracking a bear. They didn't find it, but they scared a village. Then here on the south coast yesterday, they were after something in the water. Their scanners mess with boat engines. Shh, shh. The sound continued. Hanna took a different approach. She showed him a video from her drone. It was footage of the Cathar hunters near the DMZ. They were moving through an area of dense brush. "Look at how they move," she said. "They always take the most direct route. They break through everything. They don't go around. And look at their equipment." She pointed at the glowing devices on their belts. "They use sonic pulses to detect life forms, and thermal scanners. They see heat, not shapes." June's sharpening slowed. He didn't look at the tablet, but he was listening. "They rely on their tech," Hanna continued. "They have no concept of natural camouflage. Or patience. They are very loud." June finally stopped sharpening the knife. He held up the blade, checking the edge against the light. "So they're bad hunters," he said simply. Hanna smiled slightly. "Yes, I think they are." He stood up and walked over to her. He took the tablet from her hands. He looked at the map, at the paths the aliens had taken. He used his finger to draw a line between their last 2 locations. "They'll go here next," he said, pointing to a large national park filled with hills and caves. "Lots of animals. Easy for their big ships to land." He handed the tablet back to her. "Their technology is stupid. It tells them where life is, but not what kind of life. A rabbit looks the same as a person. A warm rock in the sun looks the same as a sleeping bear." Hanna looked at him, her eyes wide. "How do you know that?" June almost shrugged. "It's obvious. If it was smart, they wouldn't have stepped in my bog." He looked at her drone.
"Can that thing make noise?"
"Yes, a loud noise." "Good," June said. A plan was forming in his mind. It wasn't a military strategy. It was a hunting plan. They are like a herd of stupid armored deer. We just have to herd them. 3 days later, a Cathar hunting party of 5 landed in the national park June had pointed to. They were eager to restore their honor. Their goal was a large wild boar that their scanners had identified. They marched into the woods, their scanners pinging. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, from the sky, a loud, high-pitched buzzing sound started. It was Hanna's drone hovering high above, invisible in the canopy. The sound was annoying and confusing to the hunters. They looked up, their weapons raised, but could see nothing. The buzzing sound moved, drifting to the north. At the same time, their scanners showed movement to the south, the boar they were after. The lead hunter decided to ignore the noise and go for the prey. They pushed through the brush, following the signal. but the signal seemed to jump around. One moment it was ahead, the next it was to the side. Hana was using the drone to create false heat signatures and sonic echoes, herding the aliens like sheep. June was on the ground, watching them. He was not hiding. He was standing in a small clearing, perfectly still. When the hunters burst into the clearing, they saw him. A human, a young one. He was just standing there looking at them with that same bored, grumpy expression. The lead hunter raised its weapon. This was the enemy? This small, soft thing? June didn't run. He turned and walked away, not quickly, but with a purpose. The hunters, frustrated and angry, followed him. They would deal with this pest first. June led them towards a series of old tunnels that ran through the hills. They were left over from an old war, dark and damp. He slipped inside one of the entrances and disappeared into the blackness. The hunters stopped at the entrance. Their thermal scanners were useless in the cold, damp tunnels. Everything was the same temperature. Their sonar pulses just echoed back, showing a maze of passages, but their pride would not let them retreat. They clicked on lights on their helmets and went in. The tunnel was a death trap, and June had prepared it. He knew every turn. He used the Cathar's own noisy movements against them. When they were clustered in a narrow passage, he triggered a small charge he had placed in a crack in the ceiling. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to collapse the tunnel behind them, cutting off their retreat and filling the space with dust, blinding their lights. Panic began to set in. They were trapped in the dark, in a maze. Then, one by one, they started to disappear. A hunter at the back of the group let out a short, choked click and was yanked into a side passage. The others turned, but there was only silence. Another hunter, its weapon shaking, saw a shadow move. It fired its energy lance. The blast lit up the tunnel for a second, revealing nothing. The blast also echoed loudly, hurting their sensitive hearing. A moment later, a simple rope snare tightened around its ankle, hoisting it upside down from the ceiling. June moved among them in the pitch black, a ghost. He didn't fight them head-on. He used their confusion, their fear, and their own weight and weapons against them. He was the land itself, and the land was hungry. When the last hunter was alone, stumbling through the dark, June finally confronted it. He didn't use the alien's weapon. He used his guile. The fight was short and brutal. The hunter was strong, but it was blind and terrified. June was calm and could see in the near-total darkness. He sidestepped a wild swing and slid his blade into the weak point at the alien's hip joint. It fell with a gurgling cry. June stood over it, breathing slowly. He wiped his blade clean on a leaf he pulled from his pocket. Then he simply walked out of the tunnel, leaving the darkness and the silence behind him. On the surface, Hana watched the data on her tablet. The 5 life signs from the hunting party had one by one gone silent. She looked up as June emerged from a different tunnel entrance, looking no different than when he went in. She just stared at him. He had taken down 5 of the galaxy's most feared hunters without a single shot from an energy weapon. June walked up to her. "They're messy," he said, and loud. He looked up at the sky. "They'll stop sending small groups now. They'll send their best. For me." He didn't sound scared. He sounded annoyed, like a man who has just finished sweeping his floor only to see more mud being tracked in. He turned and started walking back towards the trees. He had more traps to build. The silence from the national park was the final message. 5 elite hunters had entered the tunnel system. None had come out. Their life signs had simply vanished. On the Cathar mothership, the High Hunter watched the last moments of the data feed. It showed frantic movement, wild energy weapon fire, and then nothing. The confusion was gone. Now, there was only a cold, hard understanding. He called his senior hunters to the strategy room. A hologram of Earth spun slowly in the center. "We were wrong," the High Hunter said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We classified this world incorrectly. We thought the claws and teeth were the danger. We were mistaken." He zoomed in on the Korean peninsula. "The true apex predator of this world is not the tiger. It is not the bear. It is the human, but not all humans. It is a specific kind, a clever, patient, and ruthless kind that we did not even know existed." The image changed to a grainy, enhanced photo taken from a scout ship. It was Kim June, standing at the edge of the forest, his face a mask of mild irritation. "This is the hunter," the High Hunter declared. "This is the ghost of the forest. He does not fight with strength. He fights with the land. He uses our own instincts against us. He is the reason our hunters are disappearing. He looked at his gathered warriors. The great culling is over. There is only one trophy that matters now. We will hunt the human hunter. All other targets are secondary. We will find him. We will corner him. And we will take his head. A new order was broadcast to every Cathar on Earth. The hunt for wildlife was cancelled. All efforts were to be focused on locating and eliminating the human male known as Kim June. In the command tent at the edge of June's valley, Agent Park received the intelligence report. Her face was grim. They've changed their strategy. You're the primary target, June. They're coming for you. June was sitting on the floor, polishing the blade of his jile with a slow, steady rhythm. He didn't seem surprised. I know. We need to move you to a secure location. A military bunker. Somewhere they can't find you. June shook his head. No, that's what they expect. They think I'm an animal they can run to ground. If I hide in a box, they will just blow up the box. He looked up at her. They want a hunt, so we will give them one, but we will do it my way. He stood up and walked to the map of South Korea. He placed his finger not on a remote forest or a mountain, but on the sprawling neon-lit city of Seoul. Here, he said. Agent Park stared at him. Seoul? June, that's a city of 10 million people. The chaos, the collateral damage. It's the best place, June said, his voice calm. It's my territory now. He explained his plan. It was not a soldier's plan. It was a trapper's plan on a massive scale. He didn't see a city of glass and steel. He saw a new kind of forest, a forest of concrete canyons with rivers of asphalt and a different set of rules. The Cathar were masters of open hunting grounds. They would be lost in his urban jungle. The Cathar found him quickly. June made sure of it. He walked down a main street in a partially evacuated district of Seoul in plain sight. A security camera caught his image. Within minutes, the Cathar ships were converging. The High Hunter himself led the hunt. He descended in a heavy command pod, surrounded by a dozen of his best warriors. They were equipped with heavy armor and powerful scanners designed to cut through urban clutter. They saw June duck into a narrow alley between two tall buildings. The High Hunter smiled, a cruel twisting of his mandibles. He is cornered.
He has nowhere to run.
Move in. They stomped into the alley, their confidence returning. This was a simple box canyon. But when they reached the end, June was gone. There was only a metal grate leading down into the darkness. He has gone underground. Into their transport tunnels, the High Hunter commanded. After him. Do not let him escape. They ripped the grate open and dropped down into the subway system. It was dark, damp, and echoed with strange sounds. Their scanners were confused by the electrical wires and the metal tracks. This was worse than the forest tunnel. June was waiting. He knew the subway system like the back of his hand. He used the environment perfectly. He led them onto a track where he knew a maintenance train was scheduled to pass. The hunters, hearing the approaching rumble, were forced to scramble onto a narrow service ledge, pressed against the wet wall like insects. Then the lights went out. June had short-circuited a power box further down the line. In the total darkness, the hunters were blind. June wasn't. He had spent days down here, learning the feel of the place. He moved among them silently. He didn't kill them. He disabled them. He cut wires on their armor. He loosened the bolts on their leg joints. He was a mechanic, and they were broken machines. When the lights flickered back on, half of the hunters were stumbling, their systems failing. The others were disoriented and terrified. The High Hunter roared in frustration. Fall back. To the surface! They retreated back into the daylight, their numbers reduced, their pride wounded. But June wasn't done. He wanted them to follow him. He wanted to lead them to his chosen ground. He appeared again on a rooftop, silhouetted against the setting sun. He stood there for a long moment, making sure they saw him, before disappearing behind a ventilation shaft. The High Hunter saw him. There, on that tower! He is making his final stand. He has nowhere left to go. All units surround that building. He is mine! The remaining Cathar warriors converged on the skyscraper. They blasted through the main doors and began to clear the building floor by floor. They were cautious now, expecting traps at every corner, but the building seemed empty. Finally, the High Hunter and his two personal guards reached the rooftop access door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped out into the open air. The rooftop was vast and flat, covered in gravel and dotted with large air conditioning units and communication towers. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Kim June. He had his back to them, looking out over the city. He held his simple, curved gile knife in his hand. The High Hunter gestured for his guards to stay by the door. This was a trophy kill. He would do it himself. "You are trapped, human," the High Hunter boomed, his voice full of triumph. "You have led a good hunt. You have brought honor to your species. But it ends now. Face me." June slowly turned around. He didn't look scared. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "You talk too much," he said. "Real hunters don't talk. They hunt." This enraged the High Hunter. He raised his massive glowing energy lance and charged. June didn't charge back. He stood his ground. As the alien lunged, June moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible. He wasn't stronger. He was smarter. He didn't block the powerful blows. He sidestepped them. He used the High Hunter's own weight and momentum against him. The High Hunter swung his lance. June ducked under it, and the lance smashed into an AC unit, sending sparks flying. The hunter stumbled forward from the force of his own swing. June used that moment to strike, not at the hard shell of the alien's chest, but at the back of its knee joint. The guile bit deep. The High Hunter roared in pain and surprise. He was bigger, stronger, and better armed, but he couldn't hit the boy. June was like smoke. He was always just out of reach, and every time the hunter overreached, the sharp knife would find another gap in his armor, the elbow, the hip, the neck joint. It wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. The High Hunter grew more and more frantic. His attacks became wilder. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, his movements becoming slow and clumsy. He was a mighty bear being bled dry by a silent, patient wolf. Finally, with a last desperate roar, the High Hunter threw himself at June. June didn't retreat. He dropped low and swept his leg, kicking the alien's already injured knee. The joint gave way with a sickening crack. The High Hunter crashed to the gravel, his energy lance skittering away from his grasp. He lay there, breathing heavily, defeated. He looked up at June, who stood over him, the guile knife held ready. The human boy looked down at him, his expression still one of mild annoyance. "You were never the top predators," June said, his voice quiet but clear. "You were just loud tourists. The real top predators don't need to announce themselves. They just watch. And wait." He pressed the tip of his knife against the High Hunter's throat, right where the helmet met the body armor. "Now get off my planet." Then he did the one thing the High Hunter could never have predicted. He stepped back. He lowered his knife. He turned his back on the galaxy's most feared hunter and started walking towards the rooftop exit. He was letting him live. In Cathar culture, this was the ultimate insult. It was a declaration that the defeated hunter was not even worth killing. It was beneath notice. The High Hunter lay on the cold gravel, watching the small human walk away. The shame was worse than any wound. The hunt was over, and the Cathar had lost. The silence on the rooftop was heavy. The only sound was the wind whistling between the tall buildings and the low, pained clicks coming from the defeated High Hunter. He watched the human boy, Kim June, walk away without a single look back. The door to the rooftop stairwell swung shut behind him with a soft final click. The two elite guards, who had watched the entire fight in stunned horror, rushed to their leader's side. They helped him to his feet. He was badly wounded, but the deepest wound was to his pride. He had been beaten, humiliated, and then spared. It was a story that would follow him forever. He was no longer the High Hunter. He was the one who was let live. He did not give the order to pursue June. He knew it was useless. The human had not been trapped on the rooftop. The rooftop had been his trap, and they had walked right into it. The hunter had become the prey, and the prey had shown mercy. The concept was so alien it made his head spin. "Recall all hunters," the High Hunter said, his voice a broken whisper. "The hunt is over." On the Cathar mothership, the retreat was a quiet, shameful affair. The proud hunters returned to their ships, their heads bowed. They did not speak of what had happened. The story spread anyway in hushed clicks and buzzes. The ghost of the forest had beaten their best and let their leader live. The message was clear. You are not worth the effort of killing. The High Hunter stood before the main view screen. He had to make a report to the Cathar High Council. He had to explain the failure. He input a new classification for the planet known as Earth. His voice was flat, stripped of all its former pride. Cathar Collective. This is a general broadcast. Planet designation, Terra, also known as Earth. Classification is hereby updated. It is no longer a Class 10 game preserve. He took a deep, rattling breath. It is now classified as a quarantined world, inhabited by a newly identified species of Class 11 ambush predator. The dominant species, human, is to be considered extremely dangerous. They do not hunt with strength or obvious power. They hunt with patience, intelligence, and the environment itself. He looked directly into the recorder, wanting every species in the galaxy to understand. Do not engage. Do not land. Do not provoke. The risk is too great. They are the true top predators. Leave them alone, the message was sent. Across the galaxy on thousands of worlds, this new warning was received. The mighty Cathar, the hunters everyone feared, were afraid of a small blue world. The name human was now spoken with a new kind of respect and a little bit of fear. On Earth, the change was immediate. The Cathar ships, which had hung in the skies like dark clouds, began to leave. They moved quickly without any more broadcasts or speeches. They just left. The news channels exploded with celebration. The alien hunters were gone. Humanity was saved! They showed videos of people cheering in the streets, hugging each other, crying with relief. The world leaders gave speeches, taking credit for the victory, talking about the strength and resilience of the human spirit. No one mentioned a boy from the Korean woods. That part of the story was a secret, locked away in classified files. The public never knew about the grumpy teenager who hunted the hunters. A few days later, a black SUV bounced its way down the rough track to June's cabin. Agent Park and Lee Hanna got out. The world was returning to normal, but they had one last job to do. June was outside, exactly as he had been the first time they met. He was working on a snare, his hands moving with the same slow, sure rhythm. He didn't look up as they approached. Agent Park stopped a few feet away. "They're gone," she said. "Every last ship." "You did it," June gave a small nod. "Good. The government, the world. They want to thank you. There's a medal, a ceremony. You would be a hero." June finally looked up, his face the same mask of mild irritation. "No," he said simply. "But you saved the planet," Hanna said softly. "I got rid of some rude pests," June corrected her. "They were on my land. Now they're not. That's all." He went back to his work, clearly considering the conversation over. Agent Park and Hanna looked at each other. They had expected this, but they had to try. "There's a financial reward," Agent Park added. "A large one. You could live anywhere, have anything you want." June gestured around him at the quiet forest, the misty valley, the simple cabin. "I have what I want," he said. "I want quiet." He stood up, his work on the snare finished. He looked at them, and for the first time there was no annoyance in his eyes. There was just a quiet finality. "You can go now. Don't come back." He turned and walked towards the woods to check the rest of his traps. He was done with them. He was done with aliens and governments and the noisy, complicated world. Agent Park and Hanna watched him disappear into the trees. He moved without a sound, becoming a part of the forest within seconds. He was a ghost again. They got back into the SUV and drove away. As they reached the main road, Hanna looked back one last time. The valley was peaceful and still. There was no sign that anything extraordinary had ever happened there. He just went back to his life, Hanna said, amazed. Agent Park nodded, a small smile on her face. "That's what real top predators do," she said. "They don't need parades. They just need their territory, and he has his." Kim June walked through the familiar trees. He checked a snare and found a rabbit. He reset it. He checked another and found it empty. He continued his rounds. The sun was warm on his face. The birds were singing again. He reached his favorite spot, a high ledge that looked out over the whole valley. He sat down and ate a simple lunch of dried fish and rice. He looked at the sky. It was clear and blue. No dark shapes. No low hum. The galaxy had learned its lesson. It would leave him alone. The Cathar would tell stories about the ghost of the forest, and other species would hear them and decide to stay away. June finished his lunch. He dusted off his hands. He had work to do. The wild boar had been rooting near the eastern ridge again. He needed to reset the deadfall traps. He stood up and stretched. A grumpy, satisfied sigh escaped his lips. The world was safe. The aliens were gone, and he was finally blessedly alone.